Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I'm Alex, 38M, and my younger brother Jake, 32M, has always been the favorite child. He had a difficult birth and spent weeks in the NICU, so our parents have spoiled him rotten ever since, often at the expense of my sister Sarah, 35F, and me. Jake revels in the attention and has repeatedly pulled stunts to make himself the center of attention at major family events like birthdays and graduations. Sarah and I have become quite distant from Jake and our doting parents as a result. A few years ago, Jake started dating Natalie, 27F, who shamelessly revealed her pregnancy at Sarah's baby shower, stealing her thunder. When I proposed to my now wife Emma, 33F, she wanted a small wedding with both our families present, so I begrudgingly invited mine. During the preparations, my best man Liam, 38M, spotted a receipt for an engagement ring sticking out of Jake's pocket. After Liam confronted him, Jake admitted he planned to propose to Natalie at my wedding. Furious, I kicked him out of the wedding party, igniting a massive blow-up with our parents. They claimed I was judging Jake unfairly since he hadn't confessed to the proposal plan. I countered with his history of attention-grabbing antics, and they eventually made Jake promise not to pull any stunts. I didn't trust him, though, and warned that if he tried anything as a guest, he'd regret it. Sure enough, during Emma's father-daughter dance, Jake tapped his glass, stepped in front of everyone, and proposed to Natalie in the most disruptive way possible. That's when my payback unfolded. Liam and I had hired an actress to play a mistress who confronted Jake and Natalie, claiming she was pregnant with his child. When she dialed his number, which I'd supplied, I'd rigged Jacques' phony to make it look like they'd been killing each other constantly. The mistress showed fake sonogram pics as proof, leading a mortified Natalie to hurl the ring at Jackie before storming out. Catching my satisfied smirk, Jake immediately realized I'd orchestrated the whole thing. He blew up my phone demanding I clear his name, but I feigned ignorance until Emma and I returned from our honeymoon. Natalie had kicked Jake out by then, and he desperately pleaded for me to explain the truth so she'd let him see their kid. Instead, I sent Jake a screenshot of the wedding costs, vaguely asking for reimbursement. Emma was in on the revenge plot from the start, after Jake ruined her dance with her dad. Now even my sister Sarah thinks I went overboard. But Jake had it coming after years of making everything about himself. Emma agrees. He finally got a taste of his own spotlight-stealing medicine. The next one is an entitled people story. It was a scorching hot summer day, and I had just finished setting up my new above-ground pool in the backyard. This 15-foot wide baby was my pride and joy. I had been saving up for years to get this installed. The refreshing aqua blue water was practically calling my name. I couldn't wait to dive in and cool off from the relentless heat. Just as I was about to go change into my swimsuit, I heard the gate to my backyard swing open. Lo and behold, there was the neighborhood Karen, barreling towards my pool in an overly revealing bikini. Without even asking for permission, she tossed her stuff onto a lawn chair and proceeded to dip her toes into my pool. Excuse me? Can I help you? I asked, utterly perplexed by her audacity. Oh, hi, Karen replied in a phony, sweet voice. I was just walking by and saw your pool. It's such a hot day, so I figured I'd come by for a quick dip to cool down. Hope you don't mind. She flashed her pearly whites, giving me a smile so fake it could curdle milk. I stood there, stunned by her brazen attitude. Did she seriously think she could just waltz onto my property and make herself at home in my personal pool whenever she felt like it? Actually, I do mind, I asserted. This is my private property. You can't just come in here and use the pool without my permission. Karen's over-the-top smile vanished instantly. She put her hands on her hips and pursed her collagen-injected lips. Ugh, don't be such a stick in the mud, she sneered. It's just a quick swim to cool off. Don't be so selfish. Share the pool. I couldn't believe her nerve. Selfish? Lady, I don't even know you. You didn't ask politely or offer to split costs. You just barged in thinking you're entitled to use my pool. That's not how this works. Karen let out an exaggerated huff. Whatever, I'm going in, she declared smugly, immersing herself in the water. Now I was seeing red. This audacious woman clearly had no sense of boundaries, but two could play at this game. Fine, you leave me no choice then, I replied. I marched over to the circuit breaker and flipped the switch, cutting power to the pool's motor and filter. The soothing whirring stopped abruptly. Karen popped up from underwater, her dyed blonde hair sopping wet. Hey, she yelled angrily. Turn it back on right now. I'm afraid I can't do that, I responded. The pool is closed for unauthorized use. Ugh, I'm reporting you for this, Karen screeched. You can't treat people like this. I shrugged. Go right ahead, but you might want to think about how you're going to explain trespassing on private property to the cops. That seemed to give Karen pause. She hoisted herself out of the pool hastily, scrambling to grab her things, her bikini leaving little to the imagination. You'll regret this, she shouted dramatically as she stormed off. I simply waved goodbye and waited till she disappeared from sight before flipping the switch back on. Peace and quiet at last. Later that evening, I was relaxing in my favorite recliner after an uneventful dinner when the doorbell rang persistently. I opened the door to find two police officers standing on my porch. One officer spoke up. Evening, sir. We received a complaint from a Ms. Karen Smith regarding an incident earlier today. I shook my head. Of course, she actually went through with her threat to call the cops. The officer continued. She alleges you assaulted her and forcibly removed her from your premises. Can you explain your side of the story? Taking a deep breath, I calmly described the full sequence of events. How Karen had unlawfully trespassed and made herself at home in my pool without permission. I explained how I simply turned off the motor to get her to leave when she refused to listen to reason. The officers listened attentively, jotting down notes. I see, sir. Based on your statement, it appears Ms. Smith was at fault here. We'll need to get more details from her, but trespassing charges may apply in this case. Just then, we heard shouting from across the street. There he is, officers! Arrest that man immediately! Karen came barreling towards us in a floral moo-moo, pointing her bony finger in my face. Ma'am, please lower your voice. We're simply investigating both sides here, the officer interjected firmly. Well, I'll tell you my side, Karen retorted shrilly. This maniac assaulted me and threw me out like trash. I was just trying to cool down from the heat when he started yelling and made threats. I feared for my life. The officers exchanged glances as Karen kept ranting dramatically. I had to stifle a chuckle. Did she seriously think anyone would buy this wild story? Ma'am, please take a breath, the officer said calmly. Making false statements and exaggerating the events won't help your case. Karen flushed red but kept going. He's clearly dangerous. Look at him. He could go into a violent rampage at any moment. I won't feel safe until he's locked up for good. Having heard enough, the officer put his hand up. Ma'am, we'd like you to come down to the station to give an official statement and provide further details. Karen's eyes went wide with shock. Wait, you're taking me to the station? But I'm the victim here. We need to verify certain aspects of your account, the officer replied matter-of-factly. Once we have your statement, we'll determine if any charges apply. The reality of the situation finally seemed to sink in for Karen. Her boisterous attitude shrank away, replaced by fear and uncertainty. She turned to me desperately. Can't we come to some agreement here? This is just a misunderstanding after all. I folded my arms. Sorry, but you made your choice when you falsely accused me. I won't stand for slander and lies. Karen scowled but remained silent as the officers escorted her to their cruiser. Before getting in, she shot me a look so harsh it could curdle dairy, but I simply smiled and gave a little wave as they drove off with her in the back seat. A few weeks later, I received a notice in the mail. Karen was being charged with trespassing and filing a false police report. She ended up paying a hefty fine and even had to issue a formal apology. I happily framed the letter and hung it on the wall. The rest of the summer passed by smoothly. Whenever I looked out at that aqua blue water, I smiled thinking of Karen simmering away in her own juices. Maybe someday she'd learn to stay in her own lane, but I sure wouldn't hold my breath for that. The next one is a petty revenge story. Recently, some close friends and I attended a nearby university debate camp for some further experience and to prepare for the policy 1920 year. And considering it's a debate group, you would think there wouldn't be much drama, if any at all, but boy were we wrong. It all started on our second last day of camp at the university's cafeteria, where we have the task of every day finding a table or two that can somehow fit the 26 of us. For the majority of camp until that day, we had no problems borrowing seats from one or two tables here and there, but a certain Karen was about to change that for all of us. Immediately upon entering the same area as her, we immediately got the classic soccer mom Karen vibes, and when I even came near her table, she snapped at me saying, "These chairs are reserved, get out." Let it be noted that there is a university policy on reserving chairs, and there are ways to indicate if she actually reserved them or not, which of course she didn't. As the tables were filling up, and we had two of our kids standing chairless, one of my friends, who from this point I will call Nate for privacy, asked her when the group would be coming. She responded that they would be there within an hour, and Nate politely asked her for the chair to borrow since we generally took 30 minutes at most to eat. A normal person would usually either happily comply or at least politely decline. But if this was a normal story, we wouldn't be here, now would we? Instead, this Karen responded, "How about you check your ducking white boy privilege and sit the duck down?" This was funny because firstly, she was 100% white herself, and secondly, he had nowhere to sit. Obviously taken aback, he just finds another table, somewhat far away from the rest of us, and Karen continued to heavily police the table. A few minutes later, another friend, who I'll call Ethan, comes over, fully unaware of the situation at hand, walks over to Karen, and politely asks her for a chair. She responds with her typical angry snappiness, and stares Ethan down with a death stare of a woman who has spoken to 1,000 managers. When Ethan points her out on this creepy staring, she goes absolutely apocrap at this point and explodes on Ethan. "What group are you with? Where's your coach? You're coming with me for harassment." Ethan, being less passive than Nate, engages with her, calling her out on her ridiculousness. Also during this time, two unrelated college students and a cafeteria janitor all try to intervene, asking her questions like, "Do you know these kids?" and "Why are you getting so angry? They're just some dumb kids." At this point, Karen just goes beyond nuclear and drags Ethan and Nate to the university office and literally files a harassment claim on these 15-year-old teens. This is where she made her fatal mistake and our petty revenge begins. In the office, a university cop was called to talk to Nate, Ethan, and Karen, where she proceeds to make preposterous claims about them and says there are witnesses. One by one, we strike her arguments down with proof, true policy debate style, using our nerdy-ass terminology on witnesses and evidence, and actually get witnesses to testify to her craziness. At this point, she's getting flustered and angry, and tries to play the sympathy card, but we effectively destroy that. At this point, the police actually end up turning on her, and she ends up getting a harassment charge. After that, our debate group chat exploded with messages just clowning on Karen, such as "soccer mom destroyed" and "Karen for prison." In the end, the moral of the story is if you're gonna mess with a group of teens, make sure they aren't the advanced policy debate team, because we will win. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I used to work a crappy retail job in LA, and the boss had just hired a new assistant manager. Picture a blonde Karen who appears to be in her 40s, but tells everyone she's 33, who is just divorced from her Beverly Hills doctor or dentist husband, and now has to actually work for the first time in her life to support herself and her 4 children. On her first week there, this super smart lady left her Louis Vuitton bag open on the breakroom table instead of locking it in her assigned locker, and someone stole $200 from her purse. Not saying it was her fault, It was definitely the thief's fault for taking something that didn't belong to them, but Karen's response to it was just stupid. Assistant Manager Karen then told us that, as a new policy, no one could enter the break room without her permission, so that she would know who was going in there and when, so that if anything else was stolen, she'd have a clear culprit. I'm not sure how she intended to enforce this during the time she wasn't in the store, but maybe it didn't matter if other people besides her got stolen from. For reference, this was the first theft any of us had seen since being at the company. I don't think they ever caught whoever it was that stole from her because we were too cheap to have security cameras in our break room, which was an old single-room bathroom with the toilet ripped out and a table and lockers put in. But part of me really wouldn't be surprised if Karen had misplaced the $200 herself or had never had $200 to begin with. Well, we obviously didn't like Karen strutting into our workplace and trying to limit our access to our own break room, so cue malicious compliance. Every time our hands were sticky and we needed to wash them in the break room sink, we interrupted Karen. Every time we needed to take a drink of water, which we were only allowed to do in the break room, we interrupted Karen. Every time we needed to sweep something up but the broom was in the break room, we interrupted Karen. Every time we had to throw something away but the trash can was in the break room, we interrupted Karen. Every time we needed to restock a product that had a box of it sitting in the break room, we interrupted Karen. Karen could barely get her own inventories and paperwork done because of how often we needed her permission to open the break room door. She ended up getting so frustrated that the new policy lasted about 3 days, and she quit soon after that. I now have a much better job that doesn't involve retail in the slightest. The next one is an entitled people story. A little background. I'm 43F, with a son, 14. Due to needing to leave the shared home with my ex very suddenly a couple of years ago, we have been a bit transient with our home. I have a house I own, but my best friend lives there, and apart from not wanting to make him homeless, I couldn't afford to live there on my own at the time. So we spent about a year with my parents and then moved in with my granddad, 89, a year ago. He has dementia, diagnosed, but he doesn't agree with any of the doctors. And we lost my Nana suddenly a couple of months before we moved in. The first entitled, "We moved in because my uncle, 60-something, was staying in a lounge by choice. His elderly dog couldn't go up the stairs, he said, but he made it up there pretty well when the kid, the puppy, and I moved in. Anyway, he was struggling, and I said, well, we're between homes, so we can move in. The first important note is my uncle hasn't worked for quite a few years and lives in a caravan at a holiday park, on welfare, subsidized by my grandparents. He has a drinking problem, which he doesn't admit to, and smokes like a chimney. Cigarettes are very expensive here. Obligatory note. We're not in the US, so it's less common for people to live in caravans at holiday parks, and we don't tend to have the really big caravans, mobile homes. My uncle is the youngest of 3, and Granddad talks a lot about how he needs to fix the problem and that he was spoiled, etc. Well, before we moved in, he sent me an email about taking over from him, which gave me a lovely panic attack, as I work and study and have a child, and was going in to help, not be a full-time caregiver. And there are many, many, many entitled things he's done since I've been there. The short list is buying his wine and cigarettes with Granddad's money, borrowing the car, not doing much of anything besides some washing, asking me to do his stuff like take Granddad to the doctor, leaving the space he'd been staying in a mess, borrowing money for a fancy laptop. Actually, he borrows money constantly. He's quite creative in getting to use Granddad's money. My mom had to step in and take over the finances, so I stuck to boundaries, and he settled down with asking unreasonable things of me, but he's still lazy and entitled and far too busy to do more than the 3 lunchtimes a week he does for Granddad. The second and third entitled, Mum is the middle of 3, and her older brother is just as entitled if not more, not to mention his wife. Actually, she's the main antagonist at the moment, which brings us to the dishes. The eldest uncle and his wife have been helpful, but not necessarily for the right reasons, mostly just to prove they're better than his younger brother, so lots of nasty things said and trying to get people on their side, etc. which, for the most part, I ignore or Mum and I vent about. Among all of this, I have messages and emails I'm not only always copied into, but the one-on-one messages I get from both sides worries me. So since I'm the granddaughter and have no legal responsibility like Mum does, I pass on things to her to protect myself more than anything. The dishes, since my eldest uncle and his wife have been helping more, they've decided that they're in charge, and I've been spoken down to more than once by my uncle over the years. But now his wife, who acts like my best friend, who I don't trust as far as I could throw her, she lies a lot and was quite horrible to my cousins as they were growing up. She decided I needed telling off, like a child, actually no, like a piece of trash, ironically. My beloved 98-year-old grandma had been unwell and going downhill since the end of last year, and even though it was expected, her death a few weeks ago devastated me. We spent at least a day a week together, and I helped her as much as she'd let me, and her passing hit me hard. I've also been in therapy for unrelated issues, so I wasn't doing well, and neither was my son. His great-grandma adored him, and he loves her just as much. The dishwasher broke at Christmas, so we've been doing the dishes by hand, which is my son's job. Last week, the day before Grandma's funeral, he hadn't done them. Not many, but it was our night off, and he would be with his dad. So I saw no point in hassling him, as we are both grieving, and I was going to go back and do them later on. She got to the house and decided I had done it on purpose, and sent me several pics of the bench, and the few stacked and rinsed dishes with a rude message. Like I couldn't imagine talking to anyone like that. I cried. Mum handled it, she's the best, and got shouted at by her brother because he and his wife were in mourning too, as their cat had died. They compared the loss of their cat. Yes, sad, I know losing a pet is not nice, but comparing it for a start was ridiculous and is no excuse for the way she talked to me. The next one is an entitled parent's story. So my uncle recently got remarried, so that reminded me of an incident that happened with his son was very young. Now, I used to have a very decent relationship with my uncle. He was the youngest of my dad's siblings, and born almost 15 years after my dad. He was always kind of a wild child, but when he had a son, he really settled down. For the proceed of this story, my uncle with BEU, my cousin as EB, and I'm of course me. So during the summer, we all head over to my aunt's farm during the summer. This year, Spider-Man 3, the Tobey Maguire one, had just come out. Now, I was still pretty young, about 13 at the time. EB was about 8, being quite a bit younger than me. Now, I was a late bloomer and just hit that wave of puberty where girls sprout up like weeds. We were talking about Spider-Man and how it was his favorite movie. I liked it too, so I tried to talk to him about it. He got upset and said girls couldn't like Spider-Man. EB says I've probably never seen it. I just roll my eyes and describe the plot to him, and he gets really mad. But, for now, he simmers. Later, EB asks me to come outside and push him on the swing, and I do. Once again, I'm much bigger than him, so I can push him pretty high. Now, it was apparently his plan to show me that he was a boy and much stronger than me, so when he offered to push me on the swing, I accepted. He wasn't strong enough to get me very far. This enraged him. I tried to explain to him because I'm so much bigger than him, I weigh a lot more, but EB was having none of it. He runs off into my aunt's garage and comes back with a wood baseball bat. I'm so shocked. The first swing hits me clean in the stomach. The second was not too lucky. I'm bigger than him, and pissed, because I just coughed up half the orange pop I'd been drinking before. I grab that bat, wrenching it from his hand. I tell him, "Never hit me again," and apparently I'm so scary in that moment that he runs inside and gets his dad. EU storms out and the following occurs. EU, what did you do to my son? Me, sputtering. He hit me. EU, why is he crying? Me, I didn't let him. EU, and why not? He was just playing. Me, he hit me with a bat. Not long after that, the rest of my family came down. My dad and uncle talked, and we just went about the rest of the night normally, except I was told I had to stay by my mom. During the half-hour drive back to our home, My dad was pissed and told me my uncle tried to have me not just sent home, which meant the whole family would have to leave, but he wanted my banned from family gathering from there on. The fact my cousin admitted to everyone exactly what happened, as he saw nothing wrong with his actions, saved me from a lot of trouble. Naturally, I wasn't. But my uncle was always super wary of me whenever I was around from then on. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.